When Robert Downey Jr. walks onto the late-night stage just days after the death of Pope Francis, the audience expects something simple: a gentle interview, quiet reflections, maybe a quirky story or two from his latest film set. But something's off from the start. The host tries to steer the evening toward laughs, but Robert isn't following the script. He seems distant, focused, and then his eyes land on something unexpected: a small golden rosary placed silently on the table before him. That's when the atmosphere shifts. The questions change. So do the answers. What begins as a light-hearted segment slowly spirals into something else entirely: a live revelation, an unspoken confession, and a truth that's been hidden in silence for years. By the time the final words are spoken, the audience isn't clapping. They're witnessing Robert Downey Jr. break years of silence on live TV after a secret Vatican encounter. And what he shares may forever change how we think about faith, power, and prophecy. Oh, and before we go further, what's the one thing you love most about Robert Downey Jr.? Let us know in the comments. The studio lights flicker briefly before settling. The LED glow from the cameras reflects on the eager faces of the audience, buzzing with anticipation. On any other night, this would just be another late-night talk show. Jokes about celebrities, a few behind-the-scenes stories, some Hollywood charm. But tonight feels different, and not just because the world is still reeling from the passing of Pope Francis. The host, all polished smile and charm, raises his voice to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Downey Jr. Thunderous applause erupts. Some audience members stand. Others discreetly raise their phones to record, even though it's against studio policy. He enters slowly, silently, dressed in a sharp black suit, no tie. His hair is slightly tousled, longer than usual. His expression is polite, but distant. The host extends a hand. Robert shakes it gently. They sit across from each other. As expected, the table between them holds a glass of water, a few cue cards, and, curiously, a small golden rosary resting on a cushion of deep blue velvet. So, Robert, the host begins, keeping the mood light. What a time, huh? The Pope has passed. And you, well, you still look immortal. What's your secret? Holy water? Laughter ripples through the audience. But Robert only offers a faint smile. He says nothing. His gaze falls on the rosary, not a passing glance. He sees it and he pauses. The silence, awkward at first, begins to grow heavier. The audience quiets. Everything okay? The host asks, trying to lighten the mood. You're even more zen than usual tonight. Robert takes a deep breath. He reaches out, touching the rosary gently with his fingertips. His eyes drift, unfocused, as if pulling up a memory buried deep. He told me something that night in Rome, he says finally. His voice is calm but low, almost like he's speaking to himself. The host leans forward, intrigued. The audience doesn't move, but maybe today, I need to tell it. The studio freezes for a moment. People wonder if this is scripted, maybe some clever promotional tie-in for an upcoming film. But Robert isn't acting. There's no performance in his face. Tell what? The host asks, trying to keep control. Robert looks at him, but also through him. What Pope Francis entrusted to me, what he didn't want to take to the grave. The audience is silent. The host glances nervously at the crew off camera, but no one says anything through the earpiece. Robert isn't here to sell a movie. He isn't here to entertain. Years ago, he begins again, voice soft but steady. I received an invitation that didn't feel real. He shifts slightly in his seat, the rosary still in front of him. I was in Florence, shooting something small, or something personal. A European project. One night at my hotel, a man knocked on the door. He didn't give his name, just handed me an envelope, sealed with the Vatican's insignia. The audience holds its breath. Inside was an invitation. Not official, not diplomatic. It was personal, handwritten from Pope Francis himself. The host raises his eyebrows, clearly stunned. What did it say? Robert stares off, as if rereading the letter in his mind. It said, I would like to walk with you in silence, among the olive trees. That was it. No cameras, no press. Just that. The room was still. The tone had shifted. Something close to sacred, almost liturgical. And you went? The host asked, his voice barely a whisper. Robert nodded slowly. Of course I went. I thought maybe he knew something, or maybe he wanted to ask for some kind of institutional support, a donation, I don't know. But what I found was far beyond that. He paused, a heavy silence settling over the studio. I was taken in a simple car to a side entrance of the Vatican. It was cold that night. A Monsignor studio was waiting. We walked through a maze of quiet corridors and eventually emerged into a small garden. And under an old tree, he was waiting for me. Robert paused again, his voice lowered as he continued. The Pope looked tired, very thin, but his eyes were more alive than anything I've ever seen. The host didn't say a word. The audience was completely entranced. He started speaking immediately, said he'd seen a video, footage of me visiting a children's hospital. Anonymously, he said that act, the silence of it, spoke louder than any sermon he'd ever heard. Robert inhaled deeply. Then he confessed something. He said he felt like God had been silent with him for years. The words dropped like stones. The studio seemed to chill all at once. He spoke about the burden of Peter's chair, about the pain of representing something larger than yourself, but feeling utterly alone. He said he prayed, but the heavens felt mute. Robert now looked straight into the audience, something urgent in his gaze. Faith survives silence, he told me, but I fear that one day it may begin to imitate it. What did you say? The host asked, now visibly subdued. Nothing, Robert replied. I didn't say a word, I just listened. Then his tone shifted, and then he pulled an envelope from his pocket. It was sealed with red wax, and he said to me, Robert straightened slightly, repeating the Pope's words verbatim, "If I don't see you again, this secret must live." The words echoed across the silent studio. Did you open it that night? The host asked, tension rising. Robert shook his head. Number I kept it for years. But now, with him gone, I don't know if I can stay silent anymore. You could hear a pin drop. Even the subtle hum of stage equipment seemed to vanish. The host sat motionless. Robert leaned forward, his eyes locked on the golden rosary. I kept the envelope hidden, he said. It's traveled with me, through every film set, every hotel room. I never opened it. I told myself it wasn't my place. He looked up again. But when I heard he had died, something changed. Reaching into his jacket, slowly, as though handling something sacred, Robert pulled out the envelope. It was yellowed with age, the wax seal still intact, deep crimson, stamped with the papal crest. The audience stirred ever so slightly. You're going to open it now? The host asked, his voice tight. Robert didn't answer. He simply held the envelope up to the cameras, then silently broke the seal. The sound, soft but deliberate, seemed louder than anything else in that moment. He unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. And then he began to read. To the man of silence, who listens more than he speaks and sees more than he shows. The host turned toward him. The audience leaned forward as if drawn by invisible force. This world does not need more saints in gold, Robert continued reading. It needs men who will carry light through the shadows. Shadows cast by those who were meant to protect it. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, not from fear, but from reverence. I write this with a heart, torn between duty and despair. For years I fought behind marble walls. I wore the crown of the fisherman while swimming in a sea of secrets. Robert paused and swallowed. There are forces inside this church, Robert said quietly, that I could never cleanse. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it. Weariness, maybe. They wear crosses on their chests, but move like wolves. He looked down at the letter again. I tried to expose them. I failed. The host parted his lips to say something, but thought better of it. Silence once again returned its grip. Robert continued, and now, if my voice is silenced, I ask you, an outsider, untouched by the politics of my world, to carry this truth. He looked up, not to destroy, but to preserve. A long, heavy beat. Then Robert added, his tone shifting, and at the end of the letter, there was something else. He carefully unfolded a second sheet. His eyes narrowed slightly. When he spoke, his voice dropped to almost a whisper. It was a vision, a prophecy. A low murmur rippled through the studio. The host leaned forward, barely breathing. The Pope wrote. Robert paused. Then, the one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile. He will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void. Gasps moved through the audience like an audible shiver. The host blinked in disbelief. He believed, Robert said slowly, that the collapse of faith would not come from heresy, but from imitation, from someone who appeared pure, but brought nothingness. The silence that followed was total. I didn't understand it then, Robert admitted, but after that letter, everything changed. The host spoke up, barely above a murmur. What do you mean? Robert met his eyes. I started studying quietly. Faith, power, silence. I spoke to no one. I wanted to understand what he meant. He paused. And that's when they started coming. The host hesitated. Who? Robert looked directly into the camera now. Letters, anonymous, warning me, all connected to him, all telling me never to reveal what I know. He lifted the second sheet in both hands, and the weight of it felt heavier than the paper itself. His eyes scanned the room, then he turned toward the audience. "This part," he said softly, "I've never read out loud before, not to anyone." Even the crew behind the cameras stood still. The spell that had fallen was absolute. Robert read the lines again, slowly, clearly. "The one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile, he will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void." A murmur rustled through the studio like dry leaves in wind. The host sat frozen, afraid even to breathe. Robert folded the paper gently and placed it on the table beside the golden rosary. He believed that someone outside the church would rise, Robert said. Not as an enemy, but as a mirror, empty, and that this person would gain power, not by force, but by charm, by imitation of goodness. And then they would hollow everything out from the inside. The host finally broke the silence. "He thought this was already happening." Robert nodded slowly. "He told me the world's faith is no longer crumbling from truth. It's starving from illusion." The host looked visibly shaken now. He shifted in his seat, glancing sideways, maybe hoping for a signal to cut to commercial. But none came. No one dared interrupt. He also said, Robert continued, that the next great step of the church might not be taken by the church itself. The words hung in the air, unsettling and prophetic. The host whispered, "You mean someone else would carry forward its mission?" Robert didn't answer right away. His gaze returned to the rosary. He believed faith had to evolve, he said, but he was terrified it would be manipulated before it could. The audience was stone still. Not a cough, not a shift in a chair. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was weight. It was shared gravity. The feeling that something irreversible had been spoken aloud. The host tried to reset the moment. "You're talking about big ideas here, Robert. Theology, power, prophecy. Maybe we should take a breath." "No," Robert's voice cut cleanly through the room. Not loud, but final. "This isn't a story, it's a warning, and there's more." The host leaned back, now unsure of everything. Robert's voice remained calm, unwavering. "After that meeting in the Vatican, I returned home. I didn't speak. I didn't talk about it," Robert said, his voice low. "Not even to my closest friends." He paused, the weight of memory evident in his expression. "But then, a year later, I got a letter." He reached into a folder beside him and unfolded a piece of aged paper. Not ancient, but older than most people would keep without reason. No return address, no signature. He read aloud, "Do not open the envelope. There are forces watching. He was surrounded, you are not. Stay in the shadows. The silence protects more than you imagine." The host leaned forward, the tension crackling. That's threatening." Robert nodded. "That was the first." He looked out over the studio. "I received 6 more over the next 4 years, all from different cities, different countries, different handwriting. But every one of them said the same thing. And don't share what I knew." The host's voice was cautious. "Did you think they were from inside the church?" "At first, yes," Robert said. "But over time, I began to connect things." He set the letter down. The deaths of reformist priests, journalists who vanished while investigating Vatican finances, marginal notes found in locked archives, scribbled in the corners of old Bibles. He looked back at the host. Patterns, warnings, whispers. The host opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. "I came across a name," Robert said. "Well, not a name, a phrase. It was written in Latin, but it showed up again and again." He looked into the camera now. "Sine nomine." A ripple moved through the audience. Most didn't know Latin, but somehow it felt dangerous. "It means without name," Robert explained, his voice grave. "It's not an organization. It's not a cult. It's a belief, a quiet hidden network, formed by those who no longer trust the church, but still believe in God." The host whispered, "And you think the Pope trusted them?" Robert shook his head slowly. Number he feared them, but he also knew they might be necessary. He looked back at the folder, because he knew the church as it was might not survive what was coming. Another silence, a deeper one. Then Robert said something that shifted the room entirely. "That's when I realized the Pope didn't choose me by chance." The host stared at him. "What do you mean?" Robert's eyes didn't waver. "He saw something in me. Something I didn't see, not until the dream." The room stilled again. He picked up another piece of paper from the folder. More recent, more worn, but clearly handled many times. This arrived a few weeks before the Pope died. His voice was quieter now. No sender. Just a folded note slipped under my hotel room door. He held it up. No seal, no name. Just a message, typed on yellowing paper. He read, "He is surrounded. If you open the envelope, there will be consequences. Silence protects more than you know." The host blinked, visibly rattled. The audience stirred, not out of disbelief, but as if trying to shake off a chill. I didn't know what to make of it. Robert's eyes scanned the room again. But the letters kept coming. Different wording, same warning, stay quiet. The host, his voice softer now, asked, "Did you ever try to find out who sent them?" Robert nodded. "I tried everything, private investigators. Contacts in Europe, nothing. No fingerprints, no CCTV footage. Whoever sent them knew what they were doing." He opened a thin folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs. Yellowed edges, red-circled phrases, faces frozen in time. He laid a few on the table. At first I thought I was imagining connections. You know how paranoia works? You start seeing patterns that aren't there. Then he picked up a photo. A young priest, smiling, vibrant, alive. This man was Father Matteo. His voice dropped, reverent. He led youth programs in Palermo, spoke out against corruption in the church, disappeared on his way to Rome. Another clipping, a headline in Italian. Journalist found dead in Tiber River. She was investigating real estate ties between the Vatican and offshore companies in South America. They ruled it a suicide, but she just published an expose 2 days earlier. The host looked shaken. "Robert, this is a lot to process." But Robert wasn't finished. He pressed on. "Then I found notes. Hidden in old Bibles, not online, not digitized. The kind of things you only find when you're not supposed to be looking. Catalogued," Robert said, sliding a yellowed slip of paper across the table. "Handwritten, sometimes in Latin, sometimes just symbols." The host glanced down. A crude drawing of an eye stared back, simple and ominous. Beneath it, 3 words, S, nomen vivid. "Without name lives," Robert translated. His voice calm but deliberate. "I saw it again and again, buried in margins, deep in forgotten scripture." The host reached for his water but didn't drink. The audience was completely still. Robert leaned forward slightly, and then I realized something even more disturbing. He paused. The words were heavier now. "The Pope didn't just see something in me. He saw someone like them." A breath caught somewhere in the crowd. "Someone who moves in silence. Someone the world doesn't expect to carry something sacred." He closed the folder gently, eyes fixed on the host. "He didn't choose me despite the fact that I'm not part of the church. He chose me because of it." The host absorbed the moment, then asked cautiously, "But why you?" Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression clouded with memory. "Because of what came after." The host tilted his head. "After the dream?" Robert nodded slowly. "Yeah, the night I opened the envelope. I had a dream. Or maybe it was more than that." He turned slightly to the audience. "I was in a massive abandoned basilica. Dust everywhere. No candles, no prayers, just silence." A quiet shiver moved through the room. And at the altar, he was there, Pope Francis, standing, waiting. The host whispered, "What did he say?" Robert closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them again. He said, "You thought you were only an actor, but I saw a man who carried silence with dignity." The audience let out a collective breath. Not fear, but awe. "I woke up sweating," Robert said, voice rough with the memory. "I'd never felt anything like it. Since that night, I haven't been the same." The host stared at him. "Do you think he knew that he was going to die?" Robert didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was nearly a whisper. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of dying for nothing. The weight of it seemed to hang in the air. Then, deliberately, Robert turned back to the table. He pulled something else from the folder. "And that's why tonight, live." In front of everyone, he looked directly at the camera. "I'm going to show you something that was never meant to be seen." A hush swept the studio. This wasn't theater anymore. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just a guest. He was a messenger. He took a deep breath. The dream wasn't like anything I'd experienced before. It didn't feel imagined. It felt placed. He rested both hands on the table. I was in an enormous church, empty, sacred, abandoned, the kind of silence that hums in your chest, dust drifting in the light, every footstep echoed like thunder. He paused. At the altar, he waited again. Pope Francis. But not sick this time. He looked calm, radiant even. The host leaned in, completely absorbed. What did he say? Robert's gaze moved across the audience as though he was speaking to each of them personally. He said, "You thought you would only play a man of conviction, but you were always more. You carry silence like a mantle. You carry it with dignity." He swallowed hard. He said the church was drowning in its own echo, that God's voice had been buried beneath centuries of noise, that only someone who understands the value of silence could hear it again. The host, clearly moved, asked, "Do you believe it was really him?" Robert exhaled. "I don't know what to believe, but it changed me." He glanced down, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "Since then, I've stopped working as much. Started reading again. Scripture, theology, mysticism, even apocryphal texts. I've been trying to understand what he wanted me to do." He held up the notebook. Its leather cover faded, its pages soft from use. "And I started writing every night. Sometimes I feel like I'm not the one writing." Robert's voice was softer now, his fingers tracing the edges of the small notebook. The host was visibly shaken. "Robert, are you afraid?" He paused before answering. "I was, for a long time, but now I think maybe the fear was just the first test." His gaze dropped to the rosary still lying on the table. "You know, the Pope told me something else, just before the dream ended." The host waited, barely breathing. He said, "Your silence will be a door, but you must decide if you'll let others walk through it or keep it locked forever." The pause that followed was long. Even the cameras seemed to hum quieter. The host looked around, overwhelmed. "This is not what I expected when you sat down tonight." Robert smiled, but not kindly. It was tired, as if it cost him something. "It's not what I expected when I walked into the Vatican either." "Then why now?" the host asked. "Why tell all of this here on live television?" Robert looked directly into the camera. "Because truth is quieter than lies, and if I don't say this now, I might never get another chance." He leaned back slightly. "And because there's something I need to show you." The host hesitated. "Is it dangerous?" "Maybe," Robert said, almost to himself. "But what scares me more is what happens if I don't show it." He reached into the folder once more, this time slowly, deliberately. From between the papers, he pulled something small and rectangular. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from inevitability. The host leaned forward. "What is it?" Robert held it up, face down, still hidden. "It's a photograph from that night in the Vatican, a private moment, one someone else captured." The audience was completely still now. Every breath seemed held. Me, the Pope, in the garden. He flipped the photo over, looking at it first, then spoke again. "But there's something else in it." The host's voice cracked. "What?" Robert's voice dropped to a murmur. "A figure, a hooded one, in the background, just barely visible." He placed the photo on the table, but didn't turn it toward the camera. "Not yet. This figure, it appears in 3 other images I've received over the years. Always watching, always hidden." The host whispered, "Who is it?" Robert looked up slowly. "I don't know." A beat of silence, then, "But the Pope warned me in the dream. You'll see the shadow before you see the light." He slid the photo toward the host, just enough for him to see. "It's me and the Pope," Robert said, eyes not leaving the table. "Taken the night we walked in the garden. I didn't know it existed until it arrived, anonymously, years later." He pointed gently. "Look, behind the trees." The host leaned in, squinted, unsettled. "Could be anyone, maybe, but this same figure appears in all the others too." Robert laid them out, shielding the angles from the cameras. Different cities, different years, always distant, always watching. He tapped the table lightly. "The Pope's last words to me were, 'You will see the shadow before you see the light.'" The host didn't speak. "It's not a threat," Robert added, voice steady. "It's a warning. Something's coming. And it won't be the church that faces it. It'll be us." He stood slowly, like something had been lifted or passed on. He looked toward the curtain. Faith isn't gone, it's waiting. Then he turned back, one last time. And silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the beginning of war. He paused at the curtain, one hand on the frame. His voice dropped low. "And if you think this ends here," a breath, "wait, another. Because what came after this was worse." The studio stayed silent long after Robert walked off stage. The cameras kept rolling, but no one moved. The host sat motionless, a single photo still turned face down on the desk. The image unseen by millions, its weight still lingering. Some stories don't end, they echo.